Hello, everybody, and welcome to the premiere first ever episode of Office Hours, Hot for Teacher. Hot for Teacher is a spin-off show from the original Office Hours. If you're here looking for advice on how to be a better game master or how to have a better time playing role-playing games, this is not that. What this is something you should stick around for anyway. You'll see why in a second. The show is created by some very observant fans of Office Hours by realizing something about the way I was answering questions in the normal show. So during the normal Office Hours show, I kept repeating myself on a bunch of points. I would always admonish that if you are playing a tabletop role-playing game, you should talk to the people you're playing with, that everyone should agree to play by the same rules, and that you should all work together to decide what rules you'll be playing by. You should treat everybody in your group like they're a person. You should listen more than you should talk. You should be interested and be passionate, and you should care about what's going on at the table. I started using sex and relationship metaphors to make these points because it's a funny joke to say that role-playing is like having a boyfriend or attending an orgy or illustrating the close proximity of BDSM and D&D RPG. Only, it's not just hilarious. It's good advice. So in a relationship, just like at the tabletop, the most important thing is the conversation, right? Your ability to listen, to hear what people are saying, to internalize what they're saying and expressing to you, and then express yourself in a way that's honest and meaningful. And everything else, in both cases, flows from that interaction, whatever kind of game you're playing or whatever relationship you're having or hoping to have. So we are here. I have decided to start Hot for Teacher, a write-in relationship advice show, answering your questions from the point of view of a queer, non-monogamous, RPG-focused broadcaster. Yep. We're deep in the niche now, kids. It's going to work a lot like Office Hours. You've submitted tons of great questions to me. Thank you, by the way. I like it when you submit to me. But also, there's no show without questions. So, thank you. I'm going to try and answer them using my concrete, lived experience as a person. Now, your questions might have your names attached. They might not. I wanted to let this show be a little bit more anonymous than Office Hours because for some folks, it might be hard to say things out loud, like romance or vulva. Maybe there are going to be questions that I can't answer, stuff outside my experience that I don't feel right giving advice on. That's okay. I'll try to call those questions out, and we can talk about why I might not have an answer for you. Sometimes just hearing someone talk about it can be helpful. I'm going to try to not just give answers, but explore and examine the questions themselves as much as I can. Now, I do this in Office Hours already. Honestly, the questions are often a jumping off point to talk about something related, but not necessarily just, let me answer your question, let's move on. I want to take my time with the questions and do both them and the general ideas that they're about justice. Also, that was the most Canadian thing I've ever said. Did you hear that? Did you hear my Canadian accent slip out there? I try to keep it tamped down most of the time, but I totally just said a boot. Enjoy that, Americans. Now, listen, I'm not the only person in the world with things to say about relationships. So, you should probably ask these questions of the people you love and the people who love you and the people that you trust and are close to, and then make up your own mind about what to do. I am not an oracle. I can't see the future. But I do have feelings and I have opinions, and I've got a fair amount of experience both doing relationships and thinking and talking about them. And hell, sometimes it's nice to just have a stranger talk about the things that are on your mind. And I want to thank you for trusting me to be that stranger. So let's talk a little bit about me, shall we? because it's my show and I get to do that. Y'all have an idea or two about who I am and how I operate. You know, maybe you're here because you've seen my Let's Plays on YouTube, or you've seen me GM live for Roll20 or Roleplay, or maybe you've been a Twitch subscriber of mine for 5 minutes or 3 years. You've got an okay context, probably, for what I do and what I think and feel when it comes to games. But it's probable that the other stuff, the relationship stuff, might be something you don't know as much about. And I figure if you're going to be brave and ask me questions about your life, I ought to do the same and share a little about myself, you know, how I think and feel about relationships. So at least you'll have a little context for the kinds of advice you're giving, or at least where that advice is coming from. I did a video about some of this stuff back on Valentine's Day of this year. And I'll be talking about some of that stuff probably in less detail, but here's the basics, right? So first and foremost, I identify as a queer person. So for a really long time in my life, probably since I was, 12 or 13, I considered myself bisexual. That was the label that I used. But in the last few years, I've kind of broadened and refined my identity in a way that feels like it has more personal integrity and fits better with the kind of general approach I have to life and relationships. And it turns out that my exposure, thanks to the internet and this whole idea of queer theory being more present in the world than it was in, say, 1996, I have access to a new lexicon for describing myself. And the thing here is that I want to reinforce that identity is fluid, like so much about a person. There's no reason to believe that the person you are now is the person you're going to be tomorrow, or even the way that you look at being a person will be the same. So I wanted to address that because it's something that's happened to me, right? Like I identified one way and I now identify a different way. I'm sure that when I was a kid, I thought I was going to grow up to be a straight person. And when I say that I'm a queer person, or I use the phrase queer to refer to myself, what I mean is that the way I see my sexuality and my relationship structures, they're not based on a preference for any particular gender or set of genders. I don't consider myself pan or bi, though I respect people's own personal inclination to identify that way. Queer feels like a political and intentional term that fits nicely with how I see myself and my place in the world. Other people who identify the same way might define it differently, but for me, that's what it's about refusing to choose to label myself in a specific way outside of this kind of nebulous, political, slightly aggressive term. I like it. It feels good to say, and I think that's all that really matters. I have had and am having and hope to continue to have relationships with people of any and all gender identities. I'm also non-monogamous and ahierarchical in the way that I form my relationships. Sometimes you'll hear me refer to this philosophy and practice as relationship anarchy, but sometimes I have a hard time saying that with a straight face. But generally, what it means is that I reject for myself the idea that the contents of a relationship inherently define the worth or value of those relationships. Which is to say that I don't think a romantic relationship is more important or valuable than a non-romantic one. I don't believe that sex as an activity makes a relationship inherently more or less valuable simply as an aspect of that relationship. And so in this way, I hope at some base level I can treat everyone that I care about as equals, because they are, regardless of the things that we do together or the tenor of the emotions that we feel regarding one another. Now, this doesn't mean that every single relationship I have gets the same amount of time and energy from me. That would be impossible. The difference here is between equality and equity. I definitely give more of what I have to some people than others. It's just that romance and sex don't factor into my decisions around who to give my time to. I want my friends never to feel like they're less important to me because we don't have mushy romance content in our relationship. And I don't want people that I love to think they're less important than the people that I want to do sex stuff at. I don't limit myself to having only one person that I'm allowed to feel feelings for, or that I might be interested in doing sex stuff with, nor do I expect the people in my life to do the same. But when I'm in a relationship with someone, I ask them for a few things. I ask those people to talk, to tell me honestly what they're thinking and feeling. I ask them to give me whatever feels like a safe amount of access to their inner world. That's a really important part of a relationship for me. I ask the people that I'm close to have boundaries and to tell me what those boundaries are. If there are things that make the people close to me uncomfortable, I don't want to do them on purpose or by accident. And I'm going to do the same for them. I ask people close to me to have autonomy, to be their own person with their own desires and their own needs. And if our desires and needs come into conflict, I ask them to work with me to work that out. I think that all relationships fundamentally need to be built on consent and agreement. A relationship is only the stuff that everyone involved in it wants, nothing else. And I think that that's very powerful, because what I mean here is that I think that a relationship should exclude things like social normativity. I don't think that society as an object, cultural norms, religion, politics, I don't think that those get to have a say directly in a relationship. I think that the people in the relationship are the ones that define its content and its parameters, and that those people might be influenced by their religion, by their culture, by their politics, but it's about the people, not about what should be done, but what we want to do. So with those things in mind, I want to assure you that I'm going to try to do my best to remember that my relationship stuff might not be yours. I'm going to trust that you're working with the people close to you to define your relationship, whether it's non-monogamous and open, or monogamous and hierarchically oriented couple situation. This is functionally the same as me trusting you that if you are playing Pathfinder, you and your friends have all consented to play Pathfinder. All right? So I'm going to, unless you address in your question that there may be some consent issues, I'm going to assume that consent is a given. Because if you don't have consent in your relationship, it's not a relationship, it's abuse. Consent. Get some. Everyone's questions are welcome here. Whatever your gender, whatever your sexuality, whatever your kinks, whatever you got going on, your questions are welcome. And I hope that I can help you sort things out, or at the very least, give you something to think about. Because I care about doing those things. If you want to talk more about this stuff, this is sort of a unidirectional situation right now, but there's space for you to discuss, both with me and with each other. I hope that you'll use the Twitch chat if you're watching live. I hope you'll leave comments on YouTube. Be nice. I hope you'll visit the Math Squad Discord, hit up that Real Talk channel, and engage in some dialogue with your fellow viewers. Get out there. Have relationships. If you have questions that you want me to answer, go to www.adam-coble.com, click on the Hot for Teacher link, and a sexy photograph of me will present you with a form to fill out. And that's it. That's all you got to do. You don't even have to give me your name. Let's get into it, shall we? Let's answer our first question, our very first question ever for Hot for Teacher. Our very first question ever comes from my dear friend Soup. Soup says, I know you have some experience navigating this space. I'm about to take a step that might, terrifyingly, change one of my deepest platonic relationships into being a romantic one. Or it might not. We're in open and honest communication about our relationship, but some anxieties still remain around it. Do you have some tips for meeting someone you're intimate with for the first time and dealing with the aftermath, whichever way it goes? Hi, Soup. Soup is a very busy human and might not even be in chat, but Soup, thank you. Soup is a friend of mine and has been a mod in my Twitch channel and in Discord for a long time. So it's really nice that the first submission comes from Soup. Soup is a great human being, and I am pleased to have him around. what Soup is asking about here fundamentally is change. Every relationship that has ever existed has undergone change. Change is an omnipresent thing in relationships, and it's also a huge source of anxiety for people. Generally speaking, we don't like change, but every relationship starts with it. Someone starts as a stranger, right? They're a face in the crowd. They're a name on a screen. They're someone you don't know. Everyone starts as an object that resembles a person and who you suspect to be a person, but you don't know anything about them or their life. Someone introduces you and you talk and you get to know them, even just a little. And now they have a name. They live somewhere. They have pets and hobbies. They have a childhood. They have other friends. And now, you and this person, you have a relationship. Maybe your relationship with them never changes from there. Maybe you never speak to them again. Or maybe you fall in love and have babies and die together on a spaceship hurtling towards Mars. I don't fucking know. I'm not you. The thing is, for a relationship to exist at all, for intimacy to grow, we need change. Stasis doesn't really exist in relationships. We get to a place where we're comfortable with a relationship, maybe, where the parameters of what is or isn't done is squared away. And maybe we get to that place intentionally by talking about our relationship and sharing what we think and feel about each other and what shape our relationship should take. Or probably it just happens organically, where we follow a narrative where we become friends or date or whatever, because that's just what happens to people. That last part is crap. Don't do that. Talk about shit. Anyway, moving from strangers to acquaintances to friends or lovers or roommates or guild members or sworn enemies, all of that requires change. So it's funny when we get to this place where suddenly change is a source of anxiety. We're scared that things might change. And sometimes, like I suspect is the case with Soup and company, change is scary because we're looking at it as disrupting a thing we're already comfortable with. This feeling of, we've got a good thing here, let's not fuck it up, comes from the idea that change is a gamble. That by introducing some new thing into our relationship, when the relationship is already in many ways a satisfying one, we're risking that it's going to go bad. I think much, if not all of this anxiety, at least in this case, comes from the idea that romance or sex is a gamble on friendship. That you're anteing up your friendship as some kind of collateral, and if you fuck or if you fall in love, then maybe you're going to lose that ante. Maybe you're going to give up the friendship. How many times have we seen in TV shows or movies the idea of friends who risk it all to become more than friends? And they're either destined for glorious rom-com endings and true love and all that, or they're going to ruin their friendship by complicating it with sex or romance. Folks, friendship is complicated enough already. Just trying to be a decent person who makes the lives of the people around them better, who looks out for their friends and participates as an equal in friendship with integrity and mindfulness, that's complicated as fuck. You're already doing the complicated thing. But I get it. When you have a stable thing that's comfortable, there's sometimes an urge to defend and protect that thing. Protect it not from the kinds of destabilizing problems that friends have, because friends fight over stuff and disagree and act like dicks to each other by accident, but Protect it from this expected total meltdown when you try to do it a different way and fail. Fail. Only I reject that idea. I reject the idea that failure comes about from doing a thing and not enjoying it or not having it work out. That's not failure to me. If you and your friend have had this conversation about like, hey, maybe this thing that we're already doing might be nice if we continue to do it and then also involve some smooching. Or like, hey, maybe I'm having some feelings for you that I consider particularly special in a kind of mushy love eyes emoji kind of way. How does that make you feel? And if your friend is like, oh shit, let's try that out, then okay, cool, do it. And acknowledge that it's new and weird and it might be awkward if you're not familiar with it. Like eating a new cuisine for the first time and not being sure what order to put the condiments on in. Is that a sex metaphor? But like, here's the part that counts. Acknowledging that you're going into this thing, this new weird thing together, and that it might be weird, but promising to engage it as a team, that's going to make it work regardless of where you end up. And by work, I don't mean you're going to love it. I mean, you're going to keep acting with the same integrity towards yourself and each other that you did before you tried mushing your bits. Change is inevitable. The change from strangers to friends, friends to something else, the degradation to acquaintances, becoming lovers, whatever. The only thing we can do to weather change is be honest with ourselves about how we feel about that change, check in with the people close to us as we go along, and stick to our boundaries, knowing that all the while we're exploring some new, weird, exciting thing. And maybe the new, weird, exciting thing, and this is a whole other question that I'm sure someone will submit and I can answer more in depth, but even if the new weird thing is, hey, I'd like to smooch you, and they're like, yeah, I'm not really into that. There you go. That moment was a weird thing you experienced together. Expressing your feelings is a calling in of friendship. It is not a pushing away. Awkwardness is a part of every human interaction, especially sexy romantic ones. Sex is fucking weird. It's going to be anxious and awkward, and that's okay. But that's not what Soup is asking. Soup is doing a great job. Soup has had that conversation. Soup has addressed this situation with that person. And what I'm hoping is that the people involved in this situation, that Soup and this other person, will be able to say, how does this feel for you? Or, I'm feeling this way about that. And then like engage that in a conversation. It's going to make the whole thing a hell of a lot safer and better for both of you. Address your anxieties. Address them alone with yourself and address them with that person. Name your fears. Give them a form. Give them hit points and saving throws so that together, with the power of conversation, you can murder them and you can get emotional experience points that you can then spend to upgrade your intimacy. Yeah, see? There you go. That's that hot shit you're here for. The other thing is that it might just not feel okay. For you or for the person you're doing this with. Maybe both of you, but more than likely just one of you. This is where a lot of anxiety from change comes from. The idea that you want someone to stay the same and they've changed. Or they want the relationship to be a certain way and you don't. And like the idea that inherent imbalance immediately just fucks things up. That might happen, but you can mitigate the fuckery and you can work through it and like have a plan for if it goes that way. Talk about this as a situation together. Say, what can we do if one of us doesn't feel good about this? Make that plan together as friends, as people who care about each other, regardless of whether you're smooching or not. I mean, this can be hard, right? Some folks aren't great at addressing what if stuff and can't get a handle on a future version of them. And that's okay. acknowledging the potential for that situation. And because you're friends with this person, you can trust them to care about you and about your friendship, whatever shape or content it has. And I think it's a lot easier if you see it that way. But I will say this. Relationships always move forward. There's no going back. That's not to say that if the romance thing or the sexy makeout thing doesn't work out, you can't stop doing those things and still have a friendship. It's just that you're choosing to make a change in your relationship, and you might have to choose to make that change again. Now, again, it's not a change back. And if it comes to that, I hope that you go through that change supporting each other, and that knowing friendship means being there for each other even when things get a little weird. No part of any relationship is obligatory. And y'all are allowed to experiment. Just try to experiment together. That sounds like fun, right? I hope it works out okay for you, my soupy friend. Or, given that you asked me this question months ago, I hope that it did work out okay for you and is continuing to work out, whatever that looks like for you and for your friend. Our second question comes from Evan. And Evan asks, how do you form new relationships, platonic or otherwise? I'm just going to pause for a second. Fuck you, Plato. I'll talk about platonic relationships in a future question, but I hate it. I hate it. It's a terrible concept. Anyway, how do you form new relationships with most of your time being spent online and working? I found my online relationships, while they're great, don't quite fill in, where there's a lack of AFK relationships. And as I get further away from traditional school, it's getting harder to make those new relationships. So Evan is asking about me particularly, and I'm going to start there, and we'll expand out, and hopefully I can give you some advice around if you are also a busy person or don't have a ton of connection with people AFK, how you might be able to improve that. But let me talk a little bit about what my life looks like. So I spend between 40 and 60 hours a week on work things, RPG stuff, stream maintenance, emails, recording, YouTube, yada, yada, yada. Some weeks I have travel stuff to do, days where I'm flying, but the 40 to 60 hours is pretty much the balance on an average week. I spend probably another 10 to 20 hours a week doing peripherally related stuff, social media, hanging out on the Discord, answering questions on YouTube, engaging human things, but work-related human things. I would say I average about 50 hours of sleep a week, and I spend maybe 2 hours a day eating, getting dressed, tidying up, whatever. Not cooking is really helpful for that. So that leaves me about 35 hours a week, give or take, to do other stuff. See, I'm smart. I did this math in advance. I didn't try to add it all up now. Leaves me about 35 hours a week to do other stuff. I have kind of a problem with one of my relationships. I have one relationship that I neglect and I don't do a very good job taking care of. And that's my relationship with myself. Now, I'm an introvert. That means that being social is about as much work as, say, streaming or GMing. Now, it's fun most of the time, but it's work. And when I'm done, I feel tired and I feel like I need to recharge. Spending time alone, not working, like reading or watching a movie or taking photos on a walk, that time recharges me. That gives me energy. And the problem is I tend to spend the 35 odd hours a week that I have in excess of work and sleep on relationships that are not my relationship with me. I love doing these things, but that's what that time gets used for. Seeing friends, going out for dinner, going to concerts, watching movies, which is basically my favorite social activity ever. If I can go to a movie with someone and then maybe get food after and talk about the movie, it feels so good for me. Seriously, if you want to romance me, have thoughts about cinema and then take me to a movie. I spend time playing board games or driving to see my friends wherever they live. That stuff takes up most of my other time. Now, I know I should really spend more time doing stuff with me as though I were a separate person, but that's about me, and that's not answering this question. The real answer here is sort of complex, but when it comes down to it, I think that having relationships and being busy is about a combination of scheduling and choosing the right people to know. Balancing a busy life, and Jesus, mine feels busy sometimes, with social stuff and giving myself room to actually enjoy being with people is about productively making that time. And making it for the right people. Seriously, in the same way that I would have a hard time being close to someone with really different politics than I have, or people who don't share any interest in the same stuff that I do, I just tend not to get very close to people who need a lot of time from me. That's one of my things. Now, this isn't to say that I can't make time for the people I care about. I think I'm really good at finding time in my schedule to spend with people that I like. I think that the people I like know that I like them. But when we're talking about serious, engaged, in-person, one-on-one time with people, I don't actually have many of those kinds of relationships. Like, there's maybe like 3 or 4 people in the whole world that I make time to see on a regular basis. And all of those people have either known how busy I am from the moment we first met, or were close enough to me to work with me to develop a good amount of time to spend together. It's something that we've navigated as friends and will continue to navigate as friends. I've always tried to be really clear and upfront about how busy I am, and I think this kind of ties into the consent thing in a way. I consent to make space for people in my life that I care about, and they consent to me being busy, hard to schedule, and sometimes needing flexibility around plans. I try to talk to people about this and to work with them and to work it out and to build a relationship that is comfortable for all of us. Now, this doesn't always work. Sometimes the reality of only getting to see me, 4 hours a week or 48 hours out of every month, just like it's not enough. And that's okay. Right? I've had relationships end because supply and demand didn't work out. And I mean, that's a bummer. Like, don't get me wrong. It's sad when that happens, when you give up a friendship because it isn't working anymore. But it's the kind of sad you kind of have to look at with admiration, because it's about people knowing their needs and boundaries and you knowing yours. Now, something for me that works really, really well in relationships is asynchronicity, which is to say relationships where I can engage as I find time throughout the day. People who feel rewarded and emotional pleasure from an email or a text message, or that I can talk to on Discord in a way that's less intensely focused and more sort of correspondence based. Again, as an introvert, and an introvert who's very busy, being able to find 5 minutes to write a nice email or record a little, "Hey, I'm thinking about you" video is way easier than finding 8 straight hours to hang out with somebody. And that's a situation based on my needs. And so I try to find people who find that kind of thing satisfying and who are willing to consent to that type of relationship. I think a lot of this is why I'm pretty good or comfortable or whatever with long distance relationships. We'll get to that. Now, I'm guessing that's not necessarily how your brain works, Evan, or what you're after here. I think that most people get a lot from being in person with someone. That being face to face and seeing someone speak and hearing their voice and maybe being able to touch them is very reinforcing. There are certain benefits to being corporeally co-located with another human. I tend to find those things are they're an additional benefit. They're not necessarily the reason that I make friends or some crucial part of my social engagement, which is why I think streaming works so nicely as a career for me and why so many of my close friends I only ever see a few times a year, if that. I think the principles still stand, though. Making friends is about finding people whose lives fit into yours in a way that encourages and supports your bonding with them. And if you need in-person time with other humans, you need to make that time possible. You got to make room for that stuff. There are things that you are doing that you could do less of in exchange for more time to be social or to reinforce your current relationships. Now, creating new relationships can be very difficult. People are obstinate and people are weird, and most of the time, until you learn the intimate lexicon of their existential language, they might as well be fucking aliens. And I have a couple of things that I do to make friends. Seriously, just like shit that I do to help me get to an intimate place with people. Can you guess what the top thing on that list is? I bet you can. Number one thing I do to make friends. Yeah, it's role-playing games. I'm not even shitting you. Like it's very specifically a thing that I do. Nearly every serious relationship that I have right now, I feel like I developed a closeness with those people through playing tabletop role-playing games. If you watch me play role-playing games on Twitch, you have seen me in the company of many of my best friends. Friends that I would not have if I had not played games with them. I've talked before about how I think that RPGs are really good for my brain in particular because I'm so uncomfortable with unstructured socializing. Like the chaotic melee that is a party is often like a party, like the way a normal person would think of as a party, not the way that you dorks think of as a part, not an adventure. You know what I mean? The chaotic melee of that situation is often just way too much for me to navigate, but pretending to be elves and wizards on a mighty adventure is a fast track to getting to know me and letting me feel comfortable with you. So you need to find your RPG. It might be something else. It might be a book club. It might be a sports, the playing or watching of a sports. It might be activism. It might be knitting. The activity itself is often irrelevant, but the thing is that you enjoy doing it, whether you're doing it with friends or not. You can do it with strangers who might become your friends. And the thing that will cement all of this for you, I hope, is the feeling of passion and excitement that you have for the thing, because it's something that you share at least a little in common with the people you're doing it with. You have the excuse of regular contact with folks. And even if you don't meet a bunch of new people, you're still doing a thing that you love. Most of the time, in my experience, you end up bonding over the thing you're doing. In the little moments of peripheral, non-game, non-knitting time, maybe other things come up that you have in common. So find a thing, a group thing that you can do with people who are near your body. Or make them near your body. And the question being asked here is sort of funny because I think that for so many of us, school starts off as that thing. So many people in at least the culture I grew up in spend so much of our early lives in this like big group activity, surrounded by so many potential friends that suddenly graduating can be incredibly jarring. You're no longer in that place. I remember that feeling. And I think that just about every person who went to school or went to university, whatever, when you graduated, when you were done, it was like, cool, you're alone now. And I think that there's a deeper cultural narrative at play here that I don't really want to get into, but I could get into that there's a reason why high school sweethearts is a thing, because it releases us from the anxiety of being alone when we graduate. We graduate from high school, we take a person with us, we pair up with them, then we don't have to worry about being alone. Anyway, I don't want to get into all that because that's a different thing, but that cultural narrative is definitely in play. So what you can do is keep up the group activities. Don't fall in love just because you're afraid of being lonely. Have your friendship radar going full blast. People will draw your interest and you will draw their interest. And honestly, I think a lot of the time people are just lonely, and not in a sad way necessarily, but like desirous of intimacy of some kind. And you can find that intimacy by doing activities together. The step between a stranger and acquaintance is like fucking nothing. There was a narrow 1 micron line between you and turning a person you don't know into someone you do know. So go join a club, play some games, drink a beer, or whatever. Be curious about people. Ask questions and see what folks are about. Start with a shared interest. Then make time for those people. And you got to do it. You got to sacrifice. That's how it goes. Our third and final question of the day, comes from Tyler, and is about a subject near and dear to my distant heart. Tyler asks, how would you go about making long-distance relationships work? So we talked a little bit at the beginning about what makes a relationship work or successful, right? I think a relationship works as long as you and the people in it are feeling good and happy. It doesn't mean you're happy all the time. Just because you're not happy doesn't mean the relationship is failing. Periods of sadness and anger and bummed outedness are present in relationships that are working. As a person with depression, if I was not allowed to be sad in a relationship, I would never have them. Keep that in mind. Let's define for ourselves how a long-distance relationship is set up. What is a long-distance relationship? I want to talk about it before we get into this shit, because honestly, the internet has kind of gone and fucked everything up in the best possible way. So it used to be that if you wanted to be in a relationship with someone in the like traditional understanding of the term relationship, in the like, we are dating and maybe smushing our bits together and maybe we want to get married or some shit, in that sense, they had to live near you, or like near enough that you could actually see them with your eyes and touch them with your hands and other parts and confirm their material existence. A relatively modern contrivance as far as these things go, the long distance relationship is what happens when you care a bunch about a person that you can't do that shit with, or with whom that shit is intermittent or difficult as a result of personal mobility, political borders, fiscal necessity, or what have you. There's lots of reasons. Every long distance relationship has a tenor and tone that is defined by, above and beyond the people themselves, the distance itself. It's very different, for example, being intimate with a person who lives 4 hours away than it is someone who lives 40 hours away. In the same vein, it's a very different relationship when it costs $80 to go see someone, or it costs $800 to go see them. In a lot of ways, the ability to have a long distance relationship is about certain class structure stuff. Like most things, long distance relationships are easier to have if you are rich. I think Karl Marx would have some things to say about the long distance relationship being a product of the bourgeoisie. So that's a thing that's going to set the tone, right? Not Marxism, maybe. I don't know. I don't know your relationship. Distance. Distance isn't just measured in miles. Distance is measured in kilometers, because I'm from Canada, but also in cost. Cost in dollars, cost in hours. Those things can pile up. Really, it's not even about how far apart you are, but how far apart you feel. And that is what I think this whole thing keys off of. Feeling far apart. We have this expectation when we're in intimate relationships, when we're close to people and we let them get close to us, that we're going to have access to those people when we want or need them. The idea of a shoulder to cry on, someone to hug when we're sad, or to laugh with when we're happy, someone to occupy a space in our world bodily is really important to a lot of people. The other thing is that traditionally, a lot of relationships self-define by a trajectory that includes cohabitation. A lot of folks who talk about relationships refer to this trajectory as the relationship escalator. You get on the relationship escalator when you meet someone, and you follow that relationship as it escalates from friendship to romance to sex to living together to having babies to merging your bank accounts to becoming disgusting corpses together, which can be cool and nice. But being 1,000 miles apart makes that escalator trip intermittent or impossible. So a lot of folks, especially those who prioritize, say, having sex with a person on the regular with their bodies or living together, might steer away from a long distance relationship. And for me, that feeling of intimacy is reinforced, certainly, by being close to people. Sometimes. I have a bubble. It's an imaginary bubble, but it's a way I think of intimacy. There are people who are outside the bubble who I do not want touching me. There are billions and billions of these people outside my bubble. Some people outside the bubble, I am okay with occasional touching with permission. Handshakes, hugs, whatever. Some of my friends, family members, friends of friends, my fans. If you ask, you can get a temporary visit to the bubble. But most people are outside the bubble. Now, a very, very few people in my life are allowed inside the bubble. I like being close to those people. I like it when they're near me. When we are together, I feel the same comfort that I feel when I'm alone. This is maybe the biggest sign that I love a person. This is an expression of love for me. It's not like just a sex thing. You can get a temporary bubble sex visa, but this is a proximity thing, an allowance thing. It's hard to explain. But it's not a necessity for friendship or for intimacy. I have lots and lots of close humans who are still outside the bubble. So for me, the need to be physically close to someone isn't that strong. It's more a treat than it is a necessity, which makes long distance feel less distant. Not everyone is suited to this sort of thing. In the same way, not everyone is suited to be a skydiver, a weightlifter, or a concert violinist. You got to play to your strengths. Then again, sometimes we find ourselves getting close to people who are far away, and we wish they weren't so fucking far away all the time. And I think that's okay. You just have to find ways to create, nurture, and reinforce a sense of connection and intimacy. Enter the internet. I don't know why I did action castle hands there. You're in an internet. There is a person here. Admission. A lot of what I'm about to say is really privileged shit because I have money to afford things like smartphones and webcams and a good internet connection. Being able to take a picture of myself, the world around me, any random bullshit, and send it to someone immediately includes them in my life in a way they wouldn't have access to otherwise. Being able to be miles away from someone, kilometers, and being able to say good morning in a video for them makes it feel like the distance isn't so significant. Being able to play role-playing games with my friends who are in 2 other countries Another province, and well, okay, like 10 minutes away from me is pretty amazing. And that shrinks our distance. Repeating those actions and making them a part of my daily schedule in the same way that I would with people who are close to me forms a habit of intimacy. And that's the thing. While your in-person visits might be rare and special, you can do things every day to feel comfortably close, to feel intimate. That's going to depend on both people's needs. How much contact feels like enough? How often can you make time to text or write? What little things, like say writing them a handwritten letter or sending them a silly Polaroid, Why is Polaroid such a dirty word? Why is it that my mind immediately, as soon as I think, send them a Polaroid, I'm like, of your stuff. Anyway, what little things reinforce your closeness with them? And what things are just daily structural relationship stuff? Talk about that with people. I think a lot of the problem with long distance is that people get caught up in the doing of it and they don't address that they're doing it together. Like I said to Soup, bring that feeling out into the open and talk it out together. Acknowledge that it's hard and how it's hard and what makes it feel less difficult. Work together. It's not a problem. Long distance relationships are not a problem. They're a parameter. And if they feel like too much, both of you are more important than that relationship. Make sure you remember that together, right? Be flexible, but have boundaries. If it feels too difficult, change it or don't do it. Suffering is not romantic. Martyrdom is for martyrs. The biggest thing is to discuss whether or not the long distance part is a thing that you're both suffering through, hoping that if things go well, someone will move, or if it's just part of your relationship that you've accepted and nobody expects to change. That's huge. Huge, right? Talk about that. I've been in relationships where one person assumed that the other would move to make it work without talking about it, and fuck, that's no fun. Accepting either that the distance is temporary or permanent, neither being better than the other, is going to give you a baseline to work from. Establish what feels good and normal for you, and if you need more, ask for it. It's okay to feel lonely, to miss your friends, and to miss the people you want to smooch, but you can't because they're far away. It's all right. That feeling of sadness because someone isn't present, that's okay. It doesn't mean you're failing. You don't need to stiff upper lip this whole thing. You can be sad together or alone. You can be sad independently. Support each other. Just remember that distance can be a challenge in a relationship and that all relationships have challenges. Be honest with yourself and with the humans that you care about what you're capable of and how you're feeling, and be willing to adjust what you're doing to make it feel better. I hope that wherever the people that you love are, that you get to see them when you need to, and that when you can't see them, you still get to do some fun stuff together on the internet. Might I suggest role-playing? So that's it for episode number 1 of Office Hours, Hot for Teacher, a write-in relationship advice show from your favorite game master. Thank you so much for coming, everybody. If you want to get involved, you want me to answer your questions, go to www.adam-koble.com. There's a hot pic of me to reward you for visiting the Hot for Teacher link. If you fill out the form, it will submit it to me, and I would love to answer your question on the air. Thanks for coming. Have good relationships, and I will see you next time, everybody.